KCRW sponsors include A24, presenting Moonlight, a film chronicling 3 chapters in the life of a young black man discovering his identity and experiencing first love as he moves from childhood into manhood. In theaters now.
Hi, I'm Elvis Mitchell, and thanks for listening to The Treatment. Some of the most entertaining stories produced today, however, are not on the big screen, but they can be heard on KCRW's Unfictional, intimate stories and artful documentaries crafted by some of the most talented radio producers across the world. Check it out. You can find Unfictional on KCRW's iTunes page. From KCRW Santa Monica and KCRW.com, it's The Treatment. Welcome to The Treatment. I'm Elvis Mitchell. You may ask yourself, what's missing from comedy these days? It's so much about who's sleeping with whom and who isn't sleeping with whom. And the new comedy, The Brink on HBO, is kind of about that. It touches on that, but it's political comedies, geopolitical comedies, the kind of thing that's been missing from TV probably forever. And the creators of the show, Roberto and Kim and Benabib, are here. First of all, guys, thanks so much for being here.
Oh, absolutely.
Thanks for having us, Elvis.
And Roberto, you were telling me this kind of grew out of you going to see the Kubrick exhibit at LACMA a few years back.
Yeah, it was a great exhibit and found myself in the Strangelove part of it and realized, God, all the great kind of political comedies that I'd grown up with, like MASH and Catch-22 and Network and Strangelove itself, were just missing. Comedies in a post-Seinfeld world had gotten so small and macro, and they were kind of all about interpersonal relationships and workplace, and I was hankering for comedy that dealt with something more. So I called Kim. I said, does this appeal to you? And he said, absolutely. And we just started working on it, and it was just fun. And the upshot of it is we can't figure out why no one was doing this sooner. Why was there a direct correlation between like 1975 and now? But you know, maybe Vietnam. Maybe it was those comedies came out of Vietnam era, and so they were pushed. We were pushed as a society more politically than we are now. But
also, you have to remember we did this as a spec script, you know, and one of the things that happened is it got very quickly. People responded to how different it was, and that was what was kind of something it had going for it, was that there wasn't anything on TV that was quite like this. Half hour telling a lot of story in 28 pages, and it was just very different. And I think people kind of responded to it early in that sense that, wow, you know, I'm getting a lot of things that have a sameness to them, and what's going to stand out. And this thing was just had a storytelling metabolism that was just different for half hour.
Well, one of the things that feels different about it too is that it's a different take on heroism. And that seems to be one of the things that I don't know if it's directly or it's just kind of something that insinuates itself into the material.
Yeah, well, one of the things we were interested in was a core of altruism masked by a facade of vices and selfishness, and to be able to look past someone's outward persona and to realize that when push came to shove, they were actually interested in doing the right thing and making the effort and saving the world. But it was very important to mask it, to not have it be on the surface, to have it be buried beneath all this, and then ask the audience through the course of certainly season 1 to discover it and to realize that's who these characters are, not the kind of selfish, oversexed, you know, desperate characters that you see at the beginning, but that was really masking more a core of humanity.
Well, let me ask you this too, Kim, because one of the things that the show really deals with is that idea of playing that sort of heroism coming out of what seems to be cowardice or self-interest initially.
Well, I mean, I think these characters find themselves in situations where they almost have to find the sanity in the situation, and the world is kind of coming apart at the seams around them, and their own lives are coming apart, and they respond to the. You have Walter Larson, who plays who's the Secretary of State, played by Tim Robbins, who is in a room filled with pretty much hawks, and he comes in there and he's got some sense of maybe I can save this situation, maybe I can find a way. his own marriage is kind of in this very strange place and his life is falling apart. You have Pablo Schreiber plays a Navy fighter pilot who has back pain and takes pills and deals drugs on his aircraft carrier. And you have him sort of figuring out that, wait, maybe this mission they're sending me on isn't quite right. Something about it just doesn't strike me as the right thing. And he kind of double checks with his superiors about it. And you have Jack Black playing this Foreign Service officer stuck on the ground in Pakistan who also is out on the town, out trying to score weed, and finds himself in a situation where he sort of notices something about what's going on in Pakistan and responds to it in a way that takes him on a journey. So I think you start in that place and then you go quickly onto this story.
Well, one of the things I was asking you before we sat down, Roberto, and I've talked to you about this too, Kim, but Roberto, the idea that this show is set in a real world instead of some place that sounds like Latveria from an old issue of the Fantastic Four, and why you guys chose to make it a real country, real instead of like pretending it's somewhere else.
Yeah, well, the films that I referenced from the 70s, they also didn't fictionalize pretty much. I mean, in Strangelove, it was Russia. In Catch-22, it was World War II, and Italy, where Nazism, the fight against Nazism was playing out. That just seemed like the way to go. It just seemed like it's real, and therefore it speaks to you. It's like this could happen. We didn't want to fictionalize it to the point where it was pure entertainment. We wanted to actually say these are very real circumstances, very real issues, and we're finding the comedy in it, but we're finding the comedy in it for hopefully a slightly higher purpose, which is awareness.
It's interesting because one of the things that's probably happened in those 40 years since Network and 50 years since Dr. Strangelove is that a lot of that, the kind of political satire we used to see in movies has now been replaced in television. Between The Daily Show and The Colbert Report, a lot of them have taken this mantle on for themselves, haven't they?
Yeah, I think they have. And one of the things that you see in political comedy of the 70s or the Vietnam era is you see actually a baseline of realism. You see their comedy is being played against a very real portrait of the world. I mean, for example, in Network, you have the outrageousness of the Howard Beale character, but the portrait of network news at that time was very real and played very straight, in terms of that executive suite, a portrait of that. Or they kind of knew that if they fictionalized this world too much, that it was going to provide too much of a remove, and that this comedy was going to work better if people bought a certain sense of realism that was underneath everything. And that's been what we've kind of tried to do.
It's the treatment. I'm talking to the creators of the new HBO comedy series, The Brink, Roberto and Kim Benabib. Let me ask you this, because, Roberto, you are a veteran of comedy. You've been writing TV comedy for a long time, and Kim is new at it. This is his first thing, so he's already leapfrogged past 99.9% of Los Angeles, and we can hear the jealousy coming through the airways right now. But what was it that you got from working with somebody who hadn't really done this before, Roberto?
Fresh perspective, a sense of not having learned what you can't do, therefore actually being able to do it. There's a lot to be said for working with someone who hasn't been toiling in. There's a lot to be said for experience, but then that experience can sometimes close doors as well as open doors, because you've tried something before. There's an axiom that says this is not the way you're supposed to do it, and someone who isn't necessarily aware of those things can remind you. Maybe the fact that it's never been done before doesn't mean it can't be done.
Well, so I think this has been an amazing sort of course in television show running for me. I mean, to be able to see all aspects of this production has been fantastic, because our vision of this show is implemented through every step of this process, whether in the scripts that we wrote or in the production, and there's a lot of special effects in this show. There's a lot of locations, and it's big for a half hour. And to be able to see all the aspects of that production from the very beginning to the very end through my brother has been just a really valuable and just irreplaceable kind of course in how to do all this.
But one of the things you guys are saying is really true. There's a lot that goes on here. Were you worried about packing too much into a show?
No, I have to say, to a certain extent, the show that I came directly from to this show was Weeds on Showtime.
It's the last time you were here for Weeds.
Yeah, and we packed a lot into that, to the point where sometimes people would say, really, that was a half hour? It seemed like densely plotted, like an hour, and we kind of liked that because it meant a lot was going on. And in a way, Weeds was a petri dish for that level of movement and that kind of kinetic energy in a half hour, the kind you might find in a drama.
But Weeds worked its way up to that. It wasn't initially that much going on in the first season. It built to where there was more and more and more happening. But here, right away in The Brink, it starts off with a lot going on.
Yeah. I guess in a way, Weeds ran into this one. What we learned and developed in Weeds, we hit the ground running in The Brink and said, let's take that even further. Also, subject matter is slightly different. Weeds, the world of Weeds didn't encompass as large a canvas as this one does. And you have half an hour, you have 3 stories, so that's 10 minutes a story. You really kind of gotta keep it moving in order to be able to visit all worlds and have it be compelling.
Let me ask you this, and I got you guys both here, the family Benabib. I know from reading a lot of your stuff, Roberto, and seeing what you've done, you have kind of a vested interest in what's the worst that can happen in terms of having it being a device. Is that a family thing, or is it?
No, I don't think it's a family thing. I mean, it's something that comes out of a generational thing. I mean, coming out of being raised on Watergate era, and the politics of the 70s and the movies of the 70s,
That's where we were formed, really.
Yeah.
That's when we decided this is what we want to do for a living. And it was the Vietnam era, and there was a lot of cynicism, and I don't use that word in a pejorative sense. I use that word in a positive sense. A lot of cynicism that has escaped us culturally recently, especially after Iraq and all, and what we got in there, and dissent on that war was actually tantamount to treason. And we kind of grew up on that kind of dissent. It was, and so it's fun to be able to bring that back at a time when perhaps it's needed more than ever.
I think also that speaks to the timing. Our timing with this show is that in a kind of a post 9/11 world, it was necessary to go through a number of years where there was the culture did sort of wrestle with a lot of these issues in shows that mostly hour-long, very serious hour-long dramas, very high-quality, very well-done dramas that have dealt with issues of geopolitics and national security. And in that post 9/11 world, I think some time had to pass before you could get kind of a skewed take on things, kind of that other sort of view of that comic view, if you will, of what we had come through and where we were. And I'm hopefully people will kind of are ready and sort of eager to kind of see a comic take on things that have been very serious in portrayals, in drama portrayals on their television.
But I guess I'm asking that question because I find, knowing you for a while and knowing you for a while too, Kim, there's a comedic interest in the downward spiral that you guys both have.
It starts out from a place that looks like it's a downward spiral, but I think it may be revealing the way the world could be, the way the world should be in some ways. Because if you look at this show, we go into places where, like Roberto said, they're portrayed as working perfectly and beautifully in a lot of other media and a lot of other shows. And we're in maybe the Situation Room in the White House, and our characters are shown to have foibles, but also, why are there hawks in this room versus doves, and who are they, and what's motivating them, and is there this sort of male hormonal imbalance that's creating this rush to war, and I think those are just questions that are asked that might come from a place that seems cynical, but is saying, look, the world could be a lot better,
Yeah, maybe there's a core of altruism in that cynicism.
On that note of optimism, we'll take a break. We're talking about the new HBO comedy series, The Brink. My guests are Roberto and Ken Benabib. They're the executive producers and creators of the show. There's more to come. Stay with us.
Visit the Which Way LA blog for an extension of what Los Angeles is made of. News, arts, culture, and the fabric of Southern California, all in one place and updated daily. Check it out now at kcrw.com/whichwayla.
Welcome back. We're chuckling over the end of the world. This is The Treatment. My guests are the creators and executive producers of The Brink, Roberto and Kim Benabib. Tell the audience a little bit what the show is. You've given some broad strokes, but what this show is about.
This show is about three men who are trying to avert geopolitical disaster. And it's action and it's comedy and it's three-dimensional chess because these men don't necessarily know each other. When they know each other, they don't cross paths, and yet they're all working towards the same goal. And so you're seeing a geopolitical crisis played out comedically on three disparate levels. We thought they all kind of fed each other, and in a way it's been more interesting for us to write.
And these three worlds will be followed. I mean, the idea is to follow them through different crises as the show moves on, and eventually, do different parts of the world move to different locations and different venues, and see them sort of reset each season. And the three worlds are actually constructed as comedy teams. I mean, we have Tim Robbins and his chief of staff, Mary Beth Monroe, as in one world. We have Jack Black and Asif Manvi from The Daily Show, who operate on the ground in Pakistan. And we have Pablo Schreiber and Eric Ladden, who are two Navy fighter pilots on board an aircraft carrier. And what's worked out really well is we've cast them in a way that they've played off each other beautifully as three comedy teams, and we kind of cut back and forth between these worlds. So there's never really any slack, and it's kind of a unique structure for half hour.
Our storytelling is almost the same as hour-long, except without the musical interludes.
Except over the end credits. But as you're talking about these in terms of archetypal comedy terms, in teams rather, in each of these settings, there's one person who's kind of id and the other who's super ego. In fact, Asif is almost like the Peter Sellers character, one of the characters rather, I should say, the British commander in Dr. Strangelove. He's the font of common sense.
Yeah, he's also, like we were saying, there's an analog to Arthur where he plays
he's John Gielgud.
He's the John Gielgud character, giving the sort of wry commentary on the main character. Asif Manvi is amazing, and he's really good in this. He's also one of our writers
and producer.
And a producer. And it's interesting. Asif, he plays Rafiq, who's Jack Black's driver at the embassy at the very beginning, and they team up and end up at Rafiq's family's home. And so Rafiq and his family are kind of middle class, intellectual. They're professionals. They're sort of liberal, moderate Pakistanis caught between extremes. And as a result, they kind of provide kind of a moral center of our show in this season. And it's been really interesting to watch that kind of emerge. And Jack shows I don't know how many episodes you've
seen the first 7.
And he gets to a really emotional place. And Jack's character interacting with this Pakistani family has just been a really great portrait that I don't think has been shown on American television before. So it's something that we were really excited about.
That was very deliberate to be able to do that. Yes, we were going to be in Pakistan, but this family became very important to us to portray them comically, but also emotionally as well.
It's interesting because that's literally the segment of the show that is literally the most grounded. It takes place all on the ground. I mean, there's a lot of sort of air travel in the other two, and I wonder if that was kind of one of the parameters that you guys set for yourselves, that you wanted this to be as grounded as many ways as possible with that family.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think because you have a Navy fighter pilot and because you have the Secretary of State who's constantly on a plane hopscotching the world, it was very important to have feet on the ground, as they say. And that became both Jack Black and Asif Manvi's mission, storytelling-wise.
And you were saying, too, that this whole thing fell into place actually once you got the script pretty quickly, right?
Shockingly quickly. Kim and I wrote the script, gave it to our agent, who immediately gave it to Jerry Weintraub, who had a deal at HBO. Jerry Weintraub immediately got us a pilot order, and we were off and running. It was unlike anything I had ever experienced in my many years in this business.
What was it like for you, Kim, to be pulled in this thing that really took off so quickly.
It was an amazing ride. I mean, I had been told for a long time, to expect this sort of television development process that was going to drag on and go in different directions, and you really didn't know what was going to emerge out of the other end. And for us we went out with this spec script, and it just got response right away. People saying this is really different, this is cool, this is something we haven't seen before. And then things came together where we found a director in Jay Roach, and this cast came together, this amazing cast, and it was just a great way to see kind of a vision get handed off and stay relatively intact as it went through this process, and see it come out largely the way we kind of thought it up, which was really kind of surprising.
And rare.
Yeah, and rare.
We're talking shock with the creators of The Brink, Roberto and Kim Benabib. It's The Treatment. I guess as I was just watching the show, the thing that unites these three different stories being told, too, is that conflict between duty or patriotism and the right thing. I mean, that becomes as much a dramatic fulcrum as a comedic fulcrum, doesn't it?
Yeah, sometimes they diverge, patriotism and a certain jingoism and humanity and doing the right thing. And that comes into conflict quite a bit in this show. And these characters are torn by that, whereas other characters may not be.
They also have to make some compromises. I mean, Tim Robbins' character, the Secretary of State in the show, in order to achieve or to kind of get to this place of rolling back the war plans of the Hawks in the Situation Room, he's got to do some things that are right on the line of right and wrong. And he's got this greater good in his mind. And throughout the season, he's pulling some stunts and ignoring orders and doing things that are sort of off the books. And it was fascinating to see Tim get into this character and really inhabit this Secretary of State that he's playing. And I think almost the first day we did a camera test, when we saw Tim Robbins in this three-piece suit come out with his white hair, and it just was like, wow, this is the Secretary of State. It was an amazing transformation, and he just relished inhabiting this character.
And consequently, seeing Jack Black in a suit, little Brooks Brothers suit, and seeing his hair perfectly coiffed was also a revelation. It was like, wow, that's the character. Yeah. So in both instances, we felt we were taking the actors out of their comfort zone to great effect.
And also, we should also mention Pablo Schreiber, who plays the Navy fighter pilot, sort of layering on these problems that he has at home, and he has a certain amount of back pain because he's tall, a little bit almost too tall to be a fighter pilot.
Too big for the cockpit.
Exactly. So he's been taking painkillers, and this has sort of led to his inability to kind of really function, at full tilt. And so to put him on this mission where he has to perform, and Pablo just found exactly how to play these,
Yeah, we were very, Pablo is coming off of some really great work, like on Orange is the New Black, but he's playing the heavy, he's playing the bad guy, and in this one he's the good guy. So in all three arenas, we felt we took the actor kind of in a direction audiences were not quite used to, or at least hadn't been fed before, which was fun.
Do you think that's what attracted Jack and Tim to the material? They gave them a chance to do something different? Because I think people either forget or don't know that Jack Black is really a trained actor.
Oh, God, he's a wonderful actor. That is so true. Yes, I do believe that. But I believe also that they were attracted to comedy that was larger than what we had all been used to for the last few years of what comedy was. I think it was the scope and the reach of the show that intrigued them more than anything, and they've said as much.
Because, Kim, let me ask you that. One of the things I find so interesting is in the abstract as you describing these guys, you would think that it would be Jack playing Tim's character and Tim playing Jack's character, because in a lot of ways Tim's character is almost all appetites, which is the kind of thing we're used to from Jack Black. And Jack's character is somebody who talks a lot and talks himself in and out of trouble, which is the kind of thing we get used to from Timra.
Yeah, well, they both have their appetites in this show, certainly.
But you know what I mean, though?
But
that idea of that large appetite. Tim's character almost leads with his appetite.
He leads with his appetite, and then Jack's character almost very quickly decides that he wants to do something good, something
But also
important.
he leads with his ambition, which is a thing that we tend to associate with Tim Robbins.
Well, Jack's got ambitions, and Tim's got appetites. But what's interesting is what develops through the season is this sort of father-son relationship between them, and where Jack can do things for Tim that Tim needs, and Jack is looking at Tim's character and saying, this is someone who was maybe missing in my life, and it helps propel him. And so even though, interestingly, and this is another thing that's unique about this show, Jack and Tim's characters interact, but they're never in the same room. In fact, they're never even on the same continent. We're all over the world, and there's a lot of phone and Skype, and they become very important to each other without having to ever be in the same room, which is sort of unique here.
Were you worried about that bit, Roberto? Because you do have these guys who are pretty big personalities, and it'd be nice, ideally, to have them using that chemistry in the same rooms together.
Yeah, we feel that because they were such big personalities, that maybe we could get away with that in a way that you might not be able to with actors who needed that kind of proximity in order to spark each other. They kind of bring their own sparks. And also this element of the comedy teams. We gave them each partners to dance with in a way, which I think helped an enormous amount.
Because I guess one of the things I just find myself thinking, too, a lot about this in the show is that each of these characters who's kind of the lead, be it Pablo or Tim or Jack, are guys who, one way or another, are wedded to these institutions. And that ends up creating a lot of the trouble. And I wonder if that was something you guys were thinking about in terms of where these guys would or wouldn't go.
I think you're very right. They're wedded to these institutions, but I think they're all need to see marriage counselors because it's not going well, and they're having problems, and that was important to us to get at that.
But in professional terms, even in personal terms, they're really formed by their relationships to these institutions, aren't they?
Yes.
Well, yeah, they're big institutions that dominate the people that work for them, especially the Navy, and to be sort of low-level State Department official, Foreign Service officer. You're on this kind of career track that's set for you, and either you're going to make it or you're not.
What's funny about this is that Jack is a little bit too old to be that guy still, so we feel a little bit of anxiety.
You do, and when we meet him, I think we kind of understand that he hasn't quite risen the way he should have.
He's got to make up for a lot of lost time.
Exactly. When he sees the opportunity, he's going to go for it. And so,
I guess what I'm sort of thinking about too, though, so much of what I guess you guys are interested has been a kind of social realism anyway. I mean, I know from your novel, Kim, and from your stuff, Roberto, just going to Tweets and the other things, the idea is sort of constantly reminding us that there are these economic realities that are involved in every segment. Each of these worlds, the economic imperatives come into play, don't they?
Yes, absolutely, especially in Pablo's character as a Navy fighter pilot. He's just not paid enough to exist, to have a family back home. He has very real money problems. That was very important for us to show. And clearly we got a lot of comedy out of it, but that was comedy that was for a point, for a cause, for a purpose, which is showing that while we all put little yellow ribbons on our cars, we don't necessarily take as much interest that Walter Reed Hospital is falling apart. And it's that dichotomy that we wanted to deal with a little, of not just how we pay our respects to our veterans, but how we treat our veterans as well, both economically and in terms of just their needs and services.
Well, we're out of time. Let me congratulate you guys for The Brink. Thanks so much for doing this. Thank you.
Thank you, Elvis.
My pleasure. My guests are Roberto and Kim Benabib. The show is The Brink on HBO. The show is recorded and mixed by Melissa Morton. She's leaving. It's edited and produced by John Rowlett. She's leaving too. I'm the last man standing. It's The Treatment. Catch up on past episodes of The Treatment, go to KCRW.com or listen on your smartphone with KCRW's mobile apps, or subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to podcasts. The Treatment is produced and distributed by KCRW Santa Monica.